Hey guys, welcome to the 6th episode of my poker vlog. This one takes place at The Lodge in Round Rock, Texas. This is their brand new location that they just opened, 2 doors down from their previous location. It's got about 60 tables with room for more. They've got brand new seats, very bright lights, and it's just a very comfortable look and feel all around. So this session takes place on Saturday, September 11th. It's a nighttime/evening session. I usually do daytime sessions, so I haven't done a late session in a long time, so it should be a little bit different. I'll be playing 1-2 no limit holdem in this session, and I brought $300. I'm buying in for $150 twice potentially. So let's jump into the action. For this first hand, I'm sitting with Ace-4 offsuit, and I'm sitting on the button. It folds to me, and I open for $8. The small blind re-raises to $26. I call to defend since it looks like a button steal, but an ace could be good here. The flop comes 4-6-4 with 2 clubs. I flop trips, and if my opponent decides to continue with his aggression, then I'm expecting to win a lot here. The small blind immediately bets $45, and I opt to call since I don't want to scare him away. The turn brings the 6 of diamonds. The small blind bets again for $60. I only have 78 behind, so I push all in, and my opponent calls. The river brings the ace of clubs. I river a boat with 4s full of aces, though I don't think I need the ace here. I immediately show my hand. My opponent shows his hand to the big blind, but mucks, so I don't get to see what he has. I'm guessing he had an overpair to the board before the ace came, so I scoop a $300 pot.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, my phone didn't capture the video for this next hand, but I'm dealt ace-6 suited in clubs. One player limps into the pot. I raise to $15, the button calls, and then the big blind 3-bets to $45. I decide to call, and the button calls behind as well, bringing the pot to $138. The flop comes 4 hearts, 6 of spades, 7 of spades. I flop second pair with an ace kicker. The big blind leads for $100. I think for a little bit, and I end up pushing all in for $225 total. The button folds and the big blind calls, bringing the pot to $588. The turn brings my third 6 and the river's a 7, so I end up getting a full house. The opponent mucks pocket kings. I hate my play in this hand, and I got very lucky. I hit a 5-outer after getting the money in bad, meaning I only had about a 20% chance of winning here. My call to defend pre-flop was maybe too loose, as I had little reason to be speculative of my opponent at this point. When he bet about 70% of the pot on the flop, this exudes strength, and even though I hit the flop, I'm in a bad spot because of my original loose call, and just calling for half my stack here doesn't seem like a legitimate play. I need to either shove or fold, and in the moment I decided to go with a shove. It worked out, but as we saw, it wasn't the right move given how far behind we were. In this next hand, I'm dealt ace-king offsuit, and I'm sitting in early position. The second player to act limps in, and I raise to $15. The button calls, and the second player who limped in calls as well. The pot's $48. We see a flop of 8-king-2 with 2 hearts, so I flop top pair, top kicker. It checks to me and I bet $25. The button folds, but the early position player calls. The turn brings the 9 of clubs. When it checks to me again, I bet $65. My opponent folds and I pick up the pot.
Thank you.
For the next hand, I'm dealt pocket kings, and I'm sitting in the cutoff. The first floor players into the pot limp in. I raise to $20. The small blind calls, and the under the gun +1 player calls as well. The middle position player ends up pushing all in for his last $38. I decide to re-raise here to $150 to isolate against the other callers, and everyone else folds, so the pot's $122. My opponent shows ace-3 suited in diamonds, and we get to see a full run out. Unfortunately, we see an ace in the window as the flop comes ace-7-10. My hand doesn't improve as the turn brings another 10 and the river brings a deuce. In this next hand, I've got ace-king offsuit, and I'm sitting on the button. The middle position player raises to $12, and I re-raise to $36. It folds back to the middle position player, who ends up making the call, bringing the pot to $87. The flop comes king 8-4 with 2 clubs. I've got top pair, top kicker. The middle position player checks to me, and I bet $35, and he makes the call. The pot's now $157. The turn brings the 9 of clubs. My opponent checks to me, and I check behind for pot control since I only have 1 pair here. The river brings the 4 of spades. When my opponent checks to me again, given the action, I'm pretty sure I have the best hand here, so I bet $65, and after some thinking, my opponent makes the call. My opponent shows king jack for top pair and a worse kicker, and I scoop the $287 pot.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
For this next hand, I've got 10-9 suited in spades, and I'm sitting in the cutoff. There's several limpers, so I decide to limp behind. The small blind completes, and the big blind checks. The flop comes 8-7 ace with 2 clubs. I've got the top end of an open-ended straight draw. It checks to the under the gun player, who leads for $10. I call, and the button calls. The turn brings the 9 of hearts. I pick up a pair to go with my straight draw, though I imagine I'm behind. The under the gun player leads for $15 this time, and I call since I'm getting a good price to improve, and the button calls as well. The river brings the queen of hearts. I don't improve, I've just got 1 pair at this point. The under the gun player leads for $20. The betting has been pretty weak throughout the hand, and it feels like there are enough scare cards that I could possibly steal the pot with a healthy bet, so I end up raising to $85 here. It folds back to the bettor, who calls pretty quickly and shows 2 pair, 9-8 offsuit. After the hand, my opponent told me that he was looking to win one against me, so even though I've been showing down a lot of small winners prior to this hand, it seems he was gunning to get to showdown with something playable against me, and I should probably avoid trying to bluff him going forward. In the next hand, I've got pocket queens, and I'm sitting in middle position. There's a $5 straddle. I call since most straddles in this game have been getting raised with the idea of limp re-raising. The low jack calls, the cutoff raises to $20. The small blind calls the $20 bet, the straddler calls the $20 bet, and I've got a decision to make now. Out of all the players that could have raised pre-flop, I'm the most worried about the player who actually made the raise. He's been pretty transparent with his hands, only betting or raising when he's got a strong or premium holding. However, given the calls in between, I don't feel like this is a good multi-way hand, and I still feel like I need to 3-bet in order to protect my hand from other action in hopes of getting heads up. I end up 3-betting to $100. Only the cutoff player who raised makes the call, bringing the pot to $277. The flop comes 2 king 7 rainbow. I'm not liking this king high flop, as I think ace king is a likely holding for my opponent, if he wasn't already ahead before the flop. However, I end up betting to see where I stand. I make it $65, and my opponent immediately pushes all in for about $300 total. I know I'm behind, so I fold and show. My opponent is nice enough to show that he has pocket aces. I'm thankful I was able to get away from it without losing more. In this next hand, I've got 5-4 offsuit, and I'm sitting on the button. We see a number of limps, so I decide to limp here as well, simply because I have position. The small blind completes, and the big blind checks. The pot's now $14. The flop comes 2-3-6 with 2 diamonds. I flop the absolute nuts. The small blind leads for $15. The big blind calls, and one other player calls as well. When it comes to me, I raise to $75 to protect my hand against draws. The small blind instantly calls, and everyone else folds, bringing the pot to $209. The turn brings the 2 of clubs. I'm not happy that the board paired, but I don't think I'm good enough to get away from this hand if I'm behind now. The small blind checks, and I bet $50. He ends up pushing all in for $211 total, so $161 more to me. My opponent unfortunately shows that he has 3-2 offsuit for the turned boat after hitting his 4-outer.
91 more, sir.
91? Alright. In this next hand, I'm dealt 3-2 suited in hearts. I'm sitting in middle position. The first 2 players limp into the pot, so I decide to limp in as well, and the player behind me limps behind. The next player raises to $15. It folds around to me, and since I've got a pretty deep stack at this point, I end up making a loose call. The player behind me calls as well, bringing the pot to $48. The flop comes 4-8-6 with 2 hearts. I flop the lowest possible flush draw and the dumb end of a gut shot. It checks to the original raiser, who now bets $35. I decide to make the call, and the third player folds, bringing the pot to $118. The turn brings the 5 of spades. I pick up the low end of the straight. Given the pre-flop action, I don't expect the other player to have the high end of the straight here, so I lead for $50. My opponent thinks for about 20 seconds before finally making the call. The pot's now $218. The river brings the 10 of clubs. This is essentially a blank, and with my opponent's decision to not raise on the turn, I decide to make a thin value bet here. I end up leading for $100. My opponent doesn't think too long, and he makes the call. I show my hand and he mucks, so we pick up the $418 pot.
Thank you. Thank you.
In this next hand, I'm dealt ace-8 suited in hearts, and I'm sitting in the hijack. There's one limper, and I raise to $10. The button calls, and 2 other players call as well, bringing the pot to $51. The flop comes 10-7-7 with 2 hearts. I flop the nut flush draw, though I don't like that the board is paired. It checks to me, and I decide to bet a third of the pot here for $17. The button immediately raises to $40. When it folds back to me, I decide I'm getting a good enough price that I make the call. The turn brings the 6 of hearts. I hit my flush. I'm only worried about a boat here, though given how I've seen this player play previous hands, I'm not overly worried about it compared to some other holdings he could have here. He ends up pushing all in for $116, and I immediately make the call. The pot's $363. The river's a blank, brings the 4 of diamonds. My opponent reveals his hand, which unfortunately I didn't capture here, but if I remember correctly, he had pocket jacks. I end up scooping the pot.
Yeah. Thank you.
At this point, I've got a pretty sizable stack. I've got about $1,000 to $1,100 more than I bought in for, so I'm feeling pretty good. I decide that this is probably going to be my last orbit. I'm just going to play the last few hands that I have for free since I already paid for the blinds. That's when I'm dealt pocket 7s. I'm sitting under the gun +1. There's a $5 straddle, so I'm first to act. I open raise to $15. It folds to the hijack who calls, and the straddler makes the call as well. The pot's $48. We see a flop of 7-10-2 with 2 spades. So I flop the second set on a pretty wet board. It checks to me, and I make it $35. The hijack calls, and the under the gun player folds. The turn brings the queen of clubs. I'm not worried about this turn card. I want to charge any draws to continue though, so I make it $100 straight. After a good 20 to 30 seconds and a double check of his hole cards, my opponent reluctantly makes the call, bringing the pot to $318. At this point, based upon other hands I've seen this player in, I think his most likely holding is a flush draw, though it's possible he picked up 2 pair with a hand like Queen 10 or something as well. I'm just praying we don't see a spade. Of course, the river comes, the 8 of spades. I absolutely hate this river. The flush gets there, some straights get there, though I highly doubt my opponent was calling down with the gut shot draw. In the moment, I wasn't really sure what to do here. I don't see myself getting away from this hand given our stack sizes, and I also don't want to check and have the opponent check behind. Although I don't really like it, I end up leading for $100. My opponent ends up pushing all in for $192, and I make the call knowing that he's hit his flush. The pot's $702. As expected, my opponent flips over ace-5 of spades for the flush.
Nice hand. Should have just shoved the turn.
In my last hand of the night, I get dealt pocket jacks. I'm sitting under the gun. I limp in with the expectation that I'll have a chance to re-raise given how much raising has been happening at this table. However, we end up seeing pretty much the whole table limp in with the exception of maybe one player. The flop comes 8-4-8 rainbow. The flop checks around, which tells me it's possible that no one's got an 8. The turn comes the 10 of clubs. It checks to me again, and I put $10 out to see where I'm at. I end up getting one call from the button, bringing the pot to $34. The river comes the jack of clubs. I hit the money cards, though given the action I don't expect to get much more value here. I decide to make a pretty small bet in hopes of getting paid off. I make it $20 and my opponent makes the call. I show my jacks full of 8s and my opponent mucks, and I scoop the $74 pot.
Case jack right there. Was it? That's nice. I like that. Thank you.
So that ended up being my longest session since I've gotten back into the game at a little over 5 hours. I haven't played that long since I started playing again in the past few months. So, I had quite a number of hands. There's many that I didn't show through the session here. I just kind of like slowly chipped up throughout most of the hands. And like I mentioned earlier, I think at my peak I was up a little over $1,100. So I had about a $1,400 stack in front of me, give or take. And, I unfortunately gave some of it back at the end there. I had that pocket sevens hand at the end right before I left, unfortunately, which was a huge pot, and hate to have that happen right when you're about to leave, but it happens sometimes. So I ended up cashing out for... let's see. I misspoke earlier. I bought in for 200 and I cashed out for a little less than 600. So took home a win of a little less than 400 overall, which I'm happy to book a win. Not as big as I was expecting earlier in the session, but a win's a win, and I'm happy with the result. So yeah, I'm looking forward to coming back to the lodge. It's really nice in there. They improved all the issues I had with the other location for the most part. So it seems like there's a big crowd and lots of games happening all the time and lots of action. So we'll be back for sure. Please make sure to hit the like and subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. I put these out as regularly as I can. If you enjoyed the content, hopefully you'll enjoy some more. So please follow along. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Take care.